Welcome to the world of Coventry Paranormal, and the second of our 5 videos looking at famous mysteries that over time, either through investigation or through a confession, have been solved. So sit back, relax and enjoy. But remember, you can join us either via our YouTube site, where we have a number of our own investigation videos for you to look at, or you can contact and chat with us via our Facebook, Google+, or Twitter pages. So, without further ado, let's move on. For our next story, we travel back across the Atlantic to the English county of Yorkshire and the little village of Cottingley. Our story starts at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1917, towards the end of World War I, 2 young girls from the village of Cottingley in Yorkshire, England, took 2 very controversial photographs of themselves, with what they claimed to be real fairies. The 2 girls, 16-year-old Elsie Wright and her young cousin, 10-year-old Frances Griffiths, liked to go and play by a small stream or beck behind their house. Even though their parents forbade them from playing in this area, the girls continued to do so. When asked why they kept disobeying their parents' wishes, they were told that that's where the fairies lived. Understandably, their parents disbelieved them, so the girls borrowed Elsie's father's camera and took it with them down to the stream. When the photos were developed, they clearly showed Frances with 5 small fairies dancing in front of her. Elsie's father, however, was not entirely convinced, so a month later the girls took another photo, this time of Elsie with a small gnome. Elsie's father still treated the images as a joke and filed them away. However, Elsie's mother, Polly Wright, had a stronger belief in the supernatural and was more intrigued by the photographs. In 1919 she attended a lecture by the Theosophical Society in Bradford. The lecture that evening was on fairy life, and following it she showed the photos to the lead speaker, Edward Gardner, a leader of the Theosophical movement. He, in turn, gave them to Harold Snelling, a photography expert, to examine them. Snelling declared that the photos were genuine, unfaked photographs of single exposure, open-aired work, still movement in all the fairy figures, and there is no trace whatsoever of studio work involving card or paper models, dark backgrounds, painted figures, etc. Once the photos had been passed as genuine by Snelling, they soon came to the attention of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Doyle was a keen spiritualist and believer in the paranormal. He also wrote regularly for the Strand magazine, which is where he published some of his first Sherlock Holmes stories, and it was for the Christmas 1920 edition that he had been commissioned to write an article on fairies. So, in 1920, Conan Doyle contacted Edward Gardner, asking him to investigate the background of the photographs. He also wrote to Elsie and her father to ask permission to use the photos in an article. Elsie's father, Arthur, was very impressed at Conan Doyle's interest and gave his permission, but refused Conan Doyle's offer of payment on the grounds that if by any chance the photos were real, they should not be soiled by money. Gardner and Conan Doyle decided that to be sure they should seek a second opinion on the photographs, so they sought help from the Kodak Photographic Company. After several of their technicians had examined enhanced prints, they too said that there was no sign that the photos had been faked. But they concluded by saying this could not be taken as conclusive evidence that they were authentic pictures of fairies. So with that, Kodak declined to issue a certificate of authenticity. Gardner overheard one Kodak technician say, "After all, as fairies couldn't be true, the photographs must have been faked somehow." So thinking that Kodak had not been objective enough, he took them to another photographic company, this time a company called Ilford, who reported unequivocally that there was some evidence of faking. Both Gardner and Conan Doyle were a little too eager to believe in the photos, and Conan Doyle showed them to a physicist and pioneering psychical researcher, Sir Oliver Lodge, who believed straight away the photos to be fake. He suggested that a troupe of dancers had masqueraded as fairies and expressed doubts as to their distinctly Parisian hairstyles. In July 1920, Gardner went to Cottingley to visit the Wright family. Elsie's father told Gardner that he had been certain the photographs were fakes, and that while the girls were away, he had searched both their bedrooms and the area around the beck, or the stream, looking for scraps of photos, pictures or cutouts, but he'd found nothing incriminating. Gardner took with him 2 Kodak cameras and 24 secretly marked photographic plates. Frances, who was living with her parents in Scarborough, was invited back to Cottingley. He told the girls that if the weather broke on this horrible summer, that they were to take the 2 cameras and to go and try and photograph the fairies again. On the 19th of August, the weather finally perked up and both girls went back to the stream and came back after taking several more photographs, 2 of which showed fairies. Here we see the first fairy photo taken by the girls on that day, showing Frances in profile with a sprite or fairy either flying towards her or hovering in front of her. Here, in the second, we see a fairy offering a posy of harebells to Elsie. 2 days later, they took the last photograph. This showed fairies and their sunbath, and was the 5th and last photograph of the Cottingley Fairies. Strangely enough, both girls claimed to have taken this photograph. Doyle was both amazed and delighted by the photos and used them in his 1922 book The Coming of the Fairies. As before, the photographs were received with mixed credulity. Sceptics noticed that the fairies looked suspiciously like the traditional fairies of nursery tales and that they had very fashionable hairstyles. Interest in the Cottingley Fairies subsided after 1922. Elsie and Frances eventually married and lived abroad for many years, and it wasn't until 1966, when the Daily Express newspaper traced Elsie, who by that time had moved back to England, that interest in the photos began again. After an interview, she came close to confessing, but when pressed on the authenticity of the photos, all she would say was that the fairies might have been figments of my imagination. It wasn't until 1983 that the cousins finally came completely clean, when they admitted in an article published in the magazine The Unexplained that the photographs had been faked, although both maintained that they really had seen fairies. Here is a short clip from a programme made in 1985 in which both ladies talk about and confess to the trickery and deception.
What we did, and I said, we with the long hat pin, we put it down the back like that, and stuck the tape at the back like that, and then gradually wormed that down. They were longer than that, though. They were about that then, 18 inches at least, and then wormed that down into the earth. And they said that the thing was that they could see them, that the fairies were moving when the photographs were taken, but that's because they did it in the breeze.
I'd never even thought of it being a fraud. It was just Elsie and I having a bit of fun. And I can't understand it to this day why people were taken in. They wanted to be taken in. Because people often say to me, don't you feel ashamed that you've made all these poor people look fools? They believed in you. But I don't, because they wanted to believe. Look at this photograph. That fairy's all out of drawing. That leg doesn't belong to that fairy. And somebody pointed it out in the newspaper. And one of our dear believers said, well, fairies aren't like humans. They haven't got bodies like we have, or the skeleton and arms and legs. They sort of put it together with thought, and sometimes it doesn't come out right. We didn't have to tell a lie about it at all, because always somebody came out to justify it.
It was very embarrassing because, I mean, 2 village kids and a brilliant man like Conan Doyle, but we could only just keep quiet.
The important thing to remember about this whole incident is when it occurred. The United Kingdom, and what was then the British Empire, had gone through and was trying to come to terms with the war to end all wars, World War I. Just to give you a little perspective, there was over 37 million casualties, with over 16 million deaths. This meant that hardly anyone in the UK at that time was unaffected by war. Conan Doyle himself not only lost his son Kingsley as a result of the war, but also his brother Innes and 2 nephews. This may go some of the way to explaining why so many intelligent people at the time were so easily taken in. After the horrors that they'd been through, the pureness and innocence of the girls and their photos proved to them that the world still had some goodness somewhere. As a footnote, both Elsie and Francis only admitted the first 4 photos to be fake, and even though both claimed to have taken the 5th, they maintained that that was the only true fairy photograph that they had taken. So who knows? Maybe there really were fairies at the bottom of the garden. Thanks for watching, and we hope that you enjoyed this presentation. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss the 3rd episode of our Mysteries Unexplained series, when we'll be looking at the story behind the most famous Loch Ness photograph ever taken. Or should I say, the most infamous. The surgeon's photograph.